Consistency feels boring because it lacks drama, novelty, and emotional spikes, and the modern mind has been conditioned to associate progress with excitement, breakthroughs, and visible transformation. But the silent samurai understood something most people never accept, that real power is built quietly, invisibly, and without stimulation. And boredom is not a flaw in the process, it is proof that the process is working. Because boredom appears when the ego no longer feels entertained, when novelty disappears, and when the work becomes repetition instead of inspiration. And this is exactly where most people quit, not because the path is wrong, but because the mind craves stimulation more than results, and consistency denies the ego its reward of feeling special. Because doing the same thing every day does not feel heroic, it feels ordinary. And ordinary effort does not trigger dopamine the way motivation does, which is why people chase intensity instead of discipline. Intensity feels powerful in the moment, but collapses without consistency, while consistency feels dull in the moment, but compounds silently over time. And the samurai chose the latter because they were not interested in feeling powerful, they were interested in becoming powerful. And there is a critical difference between the two, because feelings fluctuate while identity compounds, and identity is built through repetition, not excitement. And when you repeat an action daily without emotional attachment, you engrave it into your nervous system, making it automatic, reliable, and independent of mood. And this is why consistency wins everything, because it removes emotion from execution, and emotion is the greatest source of instability in human behavior. And boredom is simply the nervous system realizing that novelty is gone and discipline is taking over. And most people misinterpret this signal, thinking something is wrong, that they are stuck, that progress has stopped, when in reality, progress has just moved beneath the surface, out of sight of instant gratification, and into the realm of structural change. And structural change is quiet, slow, and uncelebrated, but it is irreversible. Because once a habit becomes part of your identity, it no longer requires effort. And this is the stage the samurai trained for, where discipline no longer feels heavy because it no longer feels optional, it becomes who you are. And this is why the early phase of consistency feels the hardest and the most boring, because the mind is still negotiating, still resisting, still asking for reward. And boredom is the friction between who you were and who you are becoming. And if you push through this friction without seeking stimulation, you cross a threshold most people never reach, where effort drops and execution remains. And from the outside, it looks effortless, but inside it is the result of hundreds of boring repetitions no one saw. And the modern world is designed to make you quit right before this threshold, because everything around you rewards novelty, constant change, and visible progress, while consistency rewards none of those things until it suddenly rewards everything at once. And this delayed reward system filters out the undisciplined without force, because no one is stopping them, they simply stop themselves when boredom arrives. And boredom is the gatekeeper of mastery, not intelligence, not talent, not motivation, because everyone is motivated at the beginning, but only the disciplined remain when motivation fades. And the samurai trained in monotony deliberately, repeating the same movements thousands of times, knowing that mastery is not built through variety, but through refinement. Because refinement requires attention, and attention deepens only when distractions disappear. And boredom is the absence of distraction. And once distraction is gone, the mind confronts itself, its impatience, its need for recognition, its craving for novelty. And this confrontation is uncomfortable, which is why boredom feels heavy at first. But this discomfort is not weakness, it is withdrawal from stimulation. And once the nervous system adapts, boredom transforms into calm focus. And calm focus is where true progress accelerates, because there is no resistance, no internal debate, no emotional fluctuation,
only execution, and execution compounds faster than motivation ever could, because motivation is unreliable, while discipline is predictable, and predictability is power, because it allows systems to form, habits to lock in, and progress to become inevitable instead of accidental. And this is why consistency wins everything, because it does not rely on willpower forever. It relies on structure until structure becomes identity, and identity sustains behavior even when conditions are unfavorable. And when behavior is sustained long enough, results become unavoidable, not dramatic, not sudden, but undeniable. And this is why boring routines produce extraordinary outcomes, while exciting plans rarely survive reality. And the samurai understood that boredom is not the enemy. Boredom is the signal that you are no longer chasing stimulation, but building foundation. And foundations are invisible until the structure stands. And once it stands, people call it talent, discipline, or luck, never seeing the years of repetition beneath it. And this is why consistency feels boring, because it operates in silence, without applause, without feedback, without emotional reward. But it wins everything, because nothing can compete with momentum that does not depend on mood. And the moment you stop seeking excitement from progress and start seeking alignment, boredom loses its threat, because you no longer need the process to entertain you, you need it to transform you. And transformation is quiet.
Once you understand that boredom is not a signal to stop, but a signal that the ego is losing control, consistency becomes less of a struggle and more a test of identity. Because the real question is no longer whether the process works, but whether you can remain loyal to something that does not reward you emotionally. And this is where most people fail, not because they lack discipline, but because they seek validation from effort, wanting the world, or at least their own feelings, to acknowledge that they are doing something meaningful. But the silent samurai trained himself to detach effort from recognition, because recognition creates dependency, and dependency weakens resolve. And this is why quiet consistency builds unmatched strength, because it is self-contained, requiring no audience, no praise, and no emotional reinforcement. And when effort becomes self-contained, it becomes unstoppable, because nothing external can interrupt it. And this is the stage where boredom transforms into rhythm, where the routine no longer feels heavy, it simply exists, like breathing. And when something becomes as natural as breathing, it cannot be abandoned easily, because it no longer feels like effort. And the samurai designed their lives around rhythm rather than motivation, training at the same times, following the same rituals, repeating the same disciplines, not because they were rigid, but because rhythm removes decision fatigue. And decision fatigue is what causes inconsistency, because every decision opens the door to hesitation, negotiation, and delay, while rhythm closes those doors completely. And once rhythm is established, consistency stops requiring courage, it only requires presence. And presence is easier to maintain than motivation, because presence is immediate, not future-oriented. And boredom disappears at this stage, replaced by a calm sense of inevitability, where you no longer ask whether you will do the work, you simply do it. And this inevitability is what makes consistency unbeatable, because it outlasts every emotional fluctuation, every setback, and every distraction. And this is why people who are consistent eventually surpass those who are more talented, because talent without consistency collapses under pressure, while consistency adapts, adjusts, and continues regardless of conditions. And this adaptability is crucial, because life is not stable, and any system that relies on ideal conditions will fail, while a system built on repetition survives chaos. And the samurai trained under discomfort deliberately, knowing that comfort weakens consistency, while discomfort strengthens it, because discomfort forces adaptation, and adaptation deepens mastery.
And once mastery is reached, boredom disappears entirely, not because the work becomes exciting, but because the work becomes meaningful. And meaning is more sustaining than excitement, because excitement fades, but meaning anchors. And when your discipline is anchored in identity rather than emotion, quitting feels unnatural, not heroic. And this is why consistency wins relationships, health, wealth, and mastery, because it creates trust. Trust in yourself, trust from others, and trust in systems you build. And trust compounds just like results, slowly at first, then all at once. And this compounding effect is invisible to those who chase intensity, because they are constantly resetting, starting over, and burning out, while consistent individuals quietly accumulate progress without interruption. And this accumulation eventually creates separation, not dramatic separation, but undeniable separation, where results speak louder than effort ever did. And at this stage, people begin to ask how you stayed so disciplined, assuming you were motivated, gifted, or lucky, never realizing that you simply stayed when boredom arrived. And staying is the rarest skill in a world addicted to stimulation. And this is why consistency feels boring to those who still crave excitement, but feels grounding to those who have crossed the threshold into mastery. Because boredom is no longer interpreted as lack, it is interpreted as stability. And stability is power, because it allows focus, growth, and refinement without distraction. And the silent samurai valued stability above all else, because in stability lies control, and in control lies freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to become whoever you choose. And this freedom is built one boring day at a time, one uncelebrated repetition after another, until the identity shifts, the resistance fades, and the process sustains itself. And at that point, consistency no longer feels boring, it feels inevitable. And inevitability is the final form of discipline, because when success becomes inevitable, nothing can stop it. Not fatigue, not doubt, not external resistance. And this is why consistency wins everything, because it does not fight for victory, it quietly becomes it.
Shift occurs that most people never reach because they abandon the process too early. And that shift is the transition from external motivation to internal command, where action no longer depends on mood, energy, or inspiration, but flows from identity itself. And this is where the samurai truly separated themselves from ordinary men, because once boredom stops triggering restlessness, it begins to generate clarity. And clarity is not excitement, it is steadiness, a calm readiness that allows you to see what matters without emotional distortion. And the samurai used this state to sharpen judgment, because boredom removes urgency, and urgency is the enemy of precision. And when urgency fades, perception expands, allowing subtle details to emerge, details that frantic minds miss. And this expanded perception is why disciplined individuals often appear slower, yet act faster when it counts, because they are not reacting, they are responding. And boredom is what trains this response capacity by slowing the internal tempo of the mind. And once the mind slows, emotional impulses lose their authority, because emotions rely on speed to dominate behavior, and boredom starves them of that speed, weakening their grip over time. And this is why boredom feels uncomfortable initially, because it is dismantling emotional reflexes that once controlled you. And dismantling always feels like loss before it feels like freedom. Yet the samurai accepted this discomfort willingly, knowing that the destruction of reflexive behavior is the construction of conscious control. And conscious control is the essence of mastery, because mastery is not about doing more, it is about doing less with greater precision. And boredom trains this restraint by removing excess movement, excess thought, and excess desire, leaving only what is necessary. And necessity sharpens intention, and intention directs energy efficiently. And this efficiency is what creates quiet dominance, because power without waste compounds rapidly. And this compounding is invisible in the beginning, which is why those addicted to stimulation abandon boredom before it pays dividends. But the samurai trusted the process because they understood delayed results, training for years without recognition, knowing that discipline matures slowly but expresses itself suddenly. And boredom accelerates this maturation by forcing consistency without reward. And consistency builds reliability, and reliability builds trust, first in yourself, then in others. And a man who trusts himself does not hesitate, because hesitation is rooted in self-doubt. And boredom eliminates self-doubt by proving through repetition that you can endure without escape. And endurance is the foundation of confidence, because confidence is not belief, it is memory, memory of past endurance. And boredom creates that memory daily, reinforcing the identity of someone who does not quit when nothing is happening. And once this identity stabilizes, you stop seeking stimulation, not because you lack desire, but because desire loses urgency. And urgency is what drives impulsive behavior, and impulsive behavior is what weakens long-term outcomes. And this is why boredom also refines ambition, because it filters out shallow goals that require excitement to sustain, leaving only goals rooted in meaning and purpose. And the samurai were ruthless in this filtering process, eliminating pursuits that did not align with their code, because boredom exposes misalignment quickly, making unworthy goals unbearable, while worthy goals remain compelling even in monotony. And this is how boredom becomes a compass, pointing you toward what truly matters by making everything else feel empty. And this emptiness is not depression, it is discernment, the mind shedding illusions of importance. And once illusions fall away, focus sharpens, and with sharpened focus comes an increase in self-respect, because self-respect is built when actions align with values consistently, not when emotions feel good temporarily. And boredom enforces this alignment by removing emotional interference, forcing you to act from principle. And acting from principle creates internal coherence, where thoughts, actions, and identity align. And coherence is strength, because incoherence creates inner conflict, and inner conflict drains energy, while coherence concentrates it. And the samurai cultivated coherence through boredom deliberately, knowing that a man at peace with monotony is dangerous in chaos, because chaos cannot destabilize someone who is already stable without stimulation. And this is why boredom is not passive, it is active resistance against dependency, against distraction, against emotional volatility. And those who endure it long enough emerge with an inner stillness that cannot be shaken easily. And this stillness is not emptiness, it is readiness. Readiness to act decisively when required, and restraint when not. And this balance is what most people lack, oscillating between overreaction and apathy, while the samurai remained centered. And boredom was the axis of that center, training them to remain grounded regardless of external conditions. And once grounded, power becomes less about force and more about presence. And presence influences outcomes without effort, because presence commands attention naturally, and attention follows those who are not desperate for stimulation, validation, or reaction. And this is the silent authority boredom builds, authority that does not announce itself, but is felt. And this is why boredom, when embraced, transforms from discomfort into dominance. Not dominance over others, but dominance over impulse, over fear, over distraction. And once these are mastered, life stops feeling overwhelming and starts feeling navigable, because the noise fades and the path becomes clear. And clarity is the ultimate power the samurai sought, and boredom was one of their sharpest tools for achieving it. At the deepest level of this discipline, boredom ceases to be an experience and becomes a state of neutrality, a baseline where the mind no longer demands stimulation to feel alive. And this neutrality is what allows sustained excellence over long periods of time, because excellence is not built in moments of excitement, it is built in long stretches of quiet repetition. And the samurai structured their lives around this truth, understanding that the rare moments of battle or decision were supported by countless uneventful hours of preparation, and boredom was the container that held those hours together, preventing erosion of focus, patience, and discipline. And once boredom becomes neutral, silence becomes restorative instead of oppressive, allowing the nervous system to reset and stabilize. And this stabilization is crucial, because an overstimulated nervous system interprets everything as threat or opportunity, creating constant tension, while a stabilized system remains calm, responsive, and deliberate.
And the samurai's calm demeanor was not natural temperament, it was trained stability, forged through boredom, repetition, and restraint. And this stability allowed them to think clearly under pressure, because clarity does not emerge from intensity, it emerges from calm. And boredom trains calm by removing artificial highs and lows, creating emotional flatness that supports rational decision-making. And this emotional flatness is misunderstood in modern culture as apathy, but in reality it is composure, the ability to remain unaffected by internal fluctuations. And composure is what allows consistent execution regardless of circumstances. And consistent execution compounds power over time, because small, steady actions outperform sporadic bursts of effort fueled by emotion. And boredom enforces this steadiness by making inconsistency uncomfortable, forcing you to confront gaps in discipline. And this confrontation is uncomfortable because it exposes excuses, and boredom strips excuses mercilessly, leaving only action or surrender. And the samurai always chose action, not dramatic action, but quiet, repetitive action that seemed insignificant in isolation, but devastating in accumulation. And this accumulation is invisible until it is undeniable, which is why boredom also trains faith in the process, because you must trust that effort without immediate reward is not wasted. And this trust is essential for long-term success in any domain, because all meaningful achievements require extended periods of unglamorous work, and those who cannot endure boredom abandon the process prematurely, while those who endure emerge superior without ever needing to compete directly. And this is the hidden advantage boredom offers. It filters competition naturally, because most people quit before mastery is reached, and the samurai understood this, which is why they never rushed, never sought shortcuts, and never relied on motivation.
Because motivation fluctuates while discipline endures, and boredom is the environment where discipline is tested and strengthened. And once strengthened, discipline becomes automatic, removing the need for constant self-control, because habits take over, freeing mental energy for higher-level thinking, strategy, and awareness. And this is where boredom reveals its final gift: space. Space in the mind, space in attention, space in perception, and space allows creativity, insight, and intuition to emerge. Not forced creativity fueled by stimulation, but organic insight arising from stillness. And many of the samurai's strategic insights were born not in battle, but in quiet reflection, during long periods of uneventful training, where the mind, freed from distraction, could connect patterns subconsciously. And this same phenomenon occurs today when the mind is allowed to rest in boredom without interruption, because boredom is not emptiness, it is fertile ground, and when allowed to mature, it produces clarity, foresight, and resilience. And this is why boredom, when embraced, becomes a source of confidence, because confidence grows from knowing you can endure without needing escape, and endurance builds self-trust, and self-trust eliminates fear of silence, fear of stillness, fear of being alone with your thoughts. And once these fears dissolve, external circumstances lose their power to destabilize you, and you become internally anchored, capable of functioning effectively regardless of environment. And this is the ultimate expression of the samurai mindset, self-sufficiency of mind, where peace does not depend on stimulation, validation, or distraction, but arises naturally from internal order. And this order is what boredom builds, patiently, quietly, and relentlessly. And when boredom is no longer feared, nothing external can easily control you, because control relies on hooks, and boredom removes those hooks, leaving you free, focused, and formidable. And this is why the samurai did not seek excitement, they sought mastery. And mastery is born in silence, sharpened in repetition, and sealed in boredom. And those willing to endure this process emerge not louder, not flashier, but stronger, calmer, and unmistakably powerful. At this stage of the training, boredom is no longer something you consciously notice. It becomes background silence.
And in that silence, a new level of self-command emerges, one where discipline no longer feels forced, but inevitable, because inevitability is what separates effort from mastery. And the samurai reached this state not through intensity, but through surrender to repetition, understanding that the mind eventually stops resisting what it can no longer escape. And when resistance ends, energy previously wasted on avoidance is redirected into execution. And this redirection creates a powerful internal shift where action feels natural and inaction feels uncomfortable, reversing the pattern most people live with. And this reversal is the true reward of boredom, because once action becomes the path of least resistance, progress accelerates without strain. And this is why boredom trains long-term dominance rather than short-term motivation, because dominance is about position, not bursts of effort. And the samurai positioned themselves mentally through boredom by removing dependency on excitement, praise, and urgency, allowing them to operate from principle alone. And operating from principle creates internal alignment, where thought, action, and identity reinforce each other instead of pulling in different directions. And this alignment stabilizes the nervous system, making calm your default state rather than something you chase. And calmness amplifies perception, allowing you to sense timing, rhythm, and opportunity intuitively, which is why disciplined individuals often appear to move at exactly the right moment, not rushed, not delayed, but precise. And precision is the highest form of power because it wastes nothing. And boredom trains precision by eliminating excess movement, excess speech, excess thought, and excess desire, leaving only what is necessary. And necessity sharpens intention, and intention guides energy efficiently. And this efficiency compounds silently over time, creating results that seem sudden to outsiders, but are simply the accumulation of years of uneventful discipline. And this is why boredom also teaches humility, because when progress is built quietly, without witnesses, the ego has no stage, forcing you to measure yourself against your own standards rather than external approval. And this internal measurement system is what creates integrity, because integrity is consistency when no one is watching, and boredom ensures that no one is watching, removing all external incentives and leaving only self-respect as motivation. And self-respect is the most stable fuel available, because it does not fluctuate with mood, praise, or success. And once self-respect becomes your primary driver, discipline stops feeling heavy and starts feeling necessary, like breathing or standing upright. And this necessity removes internal debate, because you no longer ask whether you should act, you simply act. And this simplicity is where power consolidates, because decision fatigue disappears and clarity becomes constant. And with constant clarity comes the ability to remain steady during uncertainty, because uncertainty no longer triggers anxiety, it triggers attention. And attention guided by discipline is decisive rather than reactive. And this is why boredom also trains courage, because courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to escape discomfort. And boredom is prolonged discomfort without drama. And those who can endure it develop a quiet bravery that does not announce itself, but expresses itself consistently through action. And this bravery allows you to face challenges directly, rather than avoiding them through distraction. And avoidance is what keeps most people weak, because avoidance fragments effort and delays growth, while boredom concentrates effort and accelerates growth. And the samurai understood this deeply, structuring their days around practices that appeared dull on the surface, but were transformative internally. Because boredom stripped life down to essentials, revealing that most suffering comes not from difficulty, but from resistance to difficulty. And once resistance dissolves, difficulty becomes manageable, even welcome, because it signals progress. And this acceptance of difficulty is the final test of boredom training, because once you stop resisting uneventful effort, you gain access to sustained excellence, the kind that does not depend on circumstances. And sustained excellence is what defines true power, because it cannot be taken away by mood, environment, or external chaos. And this is why boredom, fully integrated, turns into an advantage so rare that few recognize it until it is too late to compete. Because by the time others realize the value of monotony, the disciplined have already moved too far ahead to catch.
In the end, boredom reveals itself not as an obstacle, but as a gateway, a threshold that must be crossed by anyone who seeks lasting strength, clarity, and self-mastery. And the samurai crossed this threshold willingly, knowing that what waits beyond is not excitement, but authority, not stimulation, but sovereignty over the self. And this sovereignty is the ultimate form of power, because it cannot be granted or taken away by anyone else. And the modern world does everything in its power to prevent you from ever reaching this state, flooding your attention with noise, novelty, and distraction, because a distracted mind is easier to influence, easier to control, and easier to exhaust, while a mind trained in boredom is resilient, independent, and dangerous in the quietest way. And this is why boredom feels like resistance, because it is resistance. Resistance against dependency, against manipulation, against the need to be constantly entertained to feel alive. And when you sit in boredom without escaping it, you are reclaiming something fundamental, your ability to choose rather than react. And this ability changes everything. Because once you can choose calmly, pressure loses its leverage, urgency loses its power, and fear loses its voice. And this is the state the samurai lived in, a state where action emerged from clarity rather than emotion, and clarity was protected fiercely through silence, repetition, and restraint. And while others chased excitement, the samurai chased refinement, knowing that refinement compounds quietly until it becomes unmistakable. And this is why boredom is the dividing line between those who talk about discipline and those who embody it, because boredom demands proof, not intention. And those who endure it build an inner structure so stable that external chaos cannot penetrate it. And once this structure is built, life stops feeling overwhelming, not because challenges disappear, but because your capacity to meet them has expanded. And this expansion is permanent because it is rooted in identity, not mood. And identity forged in boredom is unshakable because it was built without applause, without validation, and without urgency. And this is the final lesson the samurai left behind, that power is not loud, not rushed, and not stimulated. It is patient, silent, and inevitable. And boredom is the forge where that inevitability is created, slowly, quietly, and without mercy. And those willing to endure it emerge sharper, calmer, and impossible to manipulate, because nothing external can command someone who no longer needs escape. And this is the ultimate freedom boredom offers, the freedom to act with discipline, clarity, and purpose regardless of circumstance. And once you taste that freedom, you no longer fear silence, monotony, or stillness, because you understand that these are not empty spaces, they are the ground where real power grows. And this is why the samurai did not run from boredom, they walked into it daily, knowing that each uneventful moment was shaping them into something formidable, something enduring, something that would remain standing long after excitement faded. And this is the path still available to you now, if you are willing to sit where others flee, endure where others escape, and build where others distract themselves. Because boredom is not the absence of life, it is the training ground for mastery, and mastery, once earned, cannot be taken from you.